Dexter Morgan spent 8 seasons getting away with it. He fooled cops, fooled his own sister, and fooled an entire police department while burying bodies in the Gulf Stream. Then, the show handed him one last episode to close the book on all of it, and instead of landing, fans got a faceplant. The real question isn't whether people were mad. Everyone already knows they were mad. The real question is what actually went wrong, scene by scene, that turned a finale of one of the best crime shows ever made into a punchline. There are 5 specific problems in Remember the Monsters that explain why this episode still gets named as one of the worst series endings on television. Let's go through them one at a time and judge each one before moving to the next. Going into September 2013, Showtime had every reason to expect a victory lap. Dexter had run for 8 years, built a loyal fan base, and turned Showtime into a network people actually paid attention to. The numbers back that up. The finale pulled in around 2.8 million viewers and became the most watched episode in the show's history, as well as the biggest telecast Showtime had ever aired at that point. That is not a show quietly fading out. That is a show going out with the biggest audience it had ever drawn. Here's the problem. A big audience does not protect a finale from bad writing. It just means more people are watching the moment it falls apart. Reviewers noticed instantly, and the audience score kept sliding for years afterward, eventually settling around a brutal 4.9 out of 10 on IMDb, based on tens of thousands of user reviews. That is not one angry corner of the internet. That is a mass verdict, repeated for over a decade. It also did not happen out of nowhere. Season 8 had already been called one of the weakest stretches of the whole show before the finale even aired, with critics pointing out that the season had drifted away from the 2 things that made Dexter work in the first place: the constant fear of getting caught, and a villain strong enough to make that fear feel real. Walking into the last episode with those 2 problems already unsolved made a clean landing almost impossible. Even the people who hated where the story ended up generally agreed on one bright spot: Jennifer Carpenter's performance as Debra. Her acting through the hospital scenes got singled out for praise, even in reviews that tore the writing apart, which says a lot about how split this finale really is between what worked and what didn't. This is the moment that proves the finale's failure was not a matter of a few nitpickers online. A record-breaking audience showed up, and a huge chunk of them walked away feeling cheated. That reaction alone should have been a warning sign for what came next, because the actual content of the episode gives away exactly why people felt that way. If you ever argued with a friend about how a great show can still end badly, hit subscribe now, because the next section is where this finale really starts falling apart. Season 8 builds towards one moment: Deborah Morgan getting shot by Oliver Saxon, the season's killer. She and Quinn are trying to arrest him when he gets a shot off at her and escapes. Dexter has a chance to end Saxon before this point and chooses to leave him alive, which is part of what puts Debra in that room with him in the first place. In the hospital, at first, the news is good. The doctor tells Dexter the bullet missed anything critical and calls the outcome a very lucky one. Then the show pulls the floor out. A blood clot forms during surgery, triggers a stroke, and leaves Debra's brain starved of oxygen for long enough that the doctor tells Dexter she will never think, reason, or even know he is in the room again. To make things worse, a hurricane bearing down on Miami forces the hospital to start evacuating wings and cutting power, while Dexter is trying to process this news. So even the setting around Debra's death is chaos instead of anything peaceful. Dexter is left holding a decision no one else can make for him. He takes her off life support himself, tells her he loves her, and lets her go. Just one scene earlier, sitting together in her hospital bed, Debra had told Dexter that doing enough good in the world could cancel out the bad he's done, and called him a good person despite everything. That conversation is meant to set up some kind of hope for Dexter's future, which makes the tonal whiplash even rougher once the stroke hits. On paper, that is a heavy emotional scene, and the acting carries real weight. The problem is where that weight lands. Debra's death is connected to Dexter's decision to leave Saxon alive, but the final cause is a sudden medical complication, not anything Saxon or Dexter does directly in that hospital room. The show spends 8 seasons proving that Dexter's double life destroys everyone near him, then delivers that destruction through a blood clot, instead of a moment that ties cleanly back to the choice that put her in danger. This is the moment where the finale trades a clean consequence for a random one. Debra dying could have been the direct price Dexter finally paid for who he is. Instead, it plays out like bad luck in a hospital bed, and bad luck is not a satisfying ending for a character the show spent 8 years building. That death was supposed to be the emotional core of the whole episode, but the man who shot her barely gets a real ending of his own, and that's where things get even messier. Oliver Saxon, real name Daniel Vogel, is supposed to be the final season's big threat, a killer hiding in plain sight, just like Dexter once was. Instead of a final showdown that tests Dexter as an investigator or as a killer, Saxon is arrested at the hospital after the shooting, and it's later inside the police station that Dexter actually kills him. Dexter walks in using a cover story about running a gunshot residue test on him. He leaves a pin within Saxon's reach and pushes him into attacking first, setting up a kill that will look like clean self-defense. Batista and Quinn accept the self-defense explanation on paper, though their reactions afterwards suggest they suspect Dexter set the whole thing up rather than just reacting to it. No twist, no last-minute reveal, no moment where Saxon exposes Dexter to the department outright. Reviewers at the time pointed out a bigger problem hiding underneath that scene. The whole reason Dexter is still in Miami, risking everything instead of already fleeing the country with his family, is a stretch. With a hurricane closing in and every reason to disappear quietly, Dexter chooses to stay behind and face Saxon directly, mainly because the story needed a way to put him back in the same building. That kind of forced setup undercuts a character the show spent years building as careful and calculated. Compare that to how the show used to handle its killer. Brian Moser forced Dexter to face a brother who understood his darkest instincts. Arthur Mitchell forced Dexter to outthink an FBI profiler's decades-old case. Saxon never becomes that kind of opponent. Elway, the bounty hunter hunting Hannah, gets put on a no-fly list that keeps him from flying, but he still treks Hannah onto a bus, where she injects him with a drug and leaves him unconscious before slipping away. A finale season needed its villain to earn the ending. Saxon causes the event that destroys Dexter's final plan by shooting Debra, but he never feels like a strong final opponent for someone as sharp as Dexter, and that gap between the damage he causes and the threat he actually poses on screen is a part of what makes the season feel unbalanced. Now, drop a comment below on this one. Out of every villain across all 8 seasons, where does Saxon rank for you? Because compared to what's coming in the next section, his ending might be the least of this finale's problems. For 8 seasons, the show built enormous tension around one question. Will Miami Metro ever figure out that their own blood spatter analyst is the Bay Harbor Butcher? Miami Metro never discovers that Dexter is the Bay Harbor Butcher, and the finale never seriously tests whether they might. By this point, Sergeant Dokes has been dead for years, framed for Dexter's murders back in Season 2. Miami Metro already closed that case and blamed him for it. The finale had a real opportunity here. Give the department one last close call, one moment where Batista or Quinn nearly connects the dots. Instead, nothing happened. Dexter walks out of the police department for the last time exactly as safe as he's always been, with no real pressure on the secret that supposedly drove the entire show. Side characters get the same treatment. Vince Masuka's daughter, who had screen time built around her earlier in the season, never shows up again in the finale. Captain Matthews, who fans speculated might have picked up on Dexter's secret, ends the show knowing nothing at all. Batista even has a moment earlier in the season, where he questions Dexter directly about a suspicious piece of evidence, a moment that looked like it was setting up real suspicion, and that thread simply stops instead of building towards anything. These are not small side plots. They are threads the show spent real time setting up, only to let them go nowhere. A finale is supposed to close loops, not abandon them. Miami Metro walking away clueless might make sense for Dexter's survival, but it robs the ending of any real tension, since the show's central engine, the fear of getting caught, never actually gets tested one last time. With the case closed and Saxon dead, the finale only had one big move left, deciding what happened to Dexter himself. That decision is the one people still argue about more than a decade later. After Debra dies, Dexter carries her body onto his boat and places her in the ocean, echoing the way he disposed of his victims, before steering straight into an approaching hurricane. Investigators find wreckage from the boat and rule him dead. To everyone in Miami, Dexter Morgan simply drowned trying to escape a storm. Before any of that, the airport plan for Hannah and Harrison to fly out falls apart, and after it fails, they escape Miami by bus instead. Dexter's last word to his son over the phone are a simple promise that he loves him. He never shows up to keep his side of the plan. The final shot reveals the truth. Dexter is alive in Oregon, working for a logging company. He loses everyone close to him, Debra, Hannah, and his own son Harrison, but avoids arrest and public exposure for his crime, trading one hiding spot for another instead of facing any real legal reckoning for over 100 murders. The showrunner behind the episode later said that the blank look on Dexter's face in that final shot was left open on purpose, meant to leave the audience sitting in the same discomfort Dexter feels about his own life. He also said the ending was shaped partly by network limits on how the story could end. Interestingly, the showrunner before him has said his own preferred ending would have had Dexter caught and executed by the state, a version that never made it to screen. Years later, Showtime did return to the story. Dexter New Blood brought original showrunner Clyde Phillips back in 2021, picking up roughly a decade after the hurricane, with Dexter living under the alias Jim Lindsay in a small town called Iron Lake, New York. The revival continued the story after the unpopular Oregon ending and gave Dexter another final chapter. This ending wanted to feel like Quiet Punishment, a man alone with his guilt. What it actually delivers is a shrug. Dexter walks away with real losses, but no real accountability. And that trade never lands as either tragic or satisfying, just confusing. That confusion followed the show for years, and it eventually led to something almost no finale gets: another chance to tell the ending differently. Every problem in this finale points back to one thing. The show spent 8 years building tension around getting caught, being loved, and paying for what he'd done, and then let all 3 of those threads slip away quietly instead of forcing Dexter to actually face them. Deborah's death traces back to Dexter's own choice, but lands through a medical complication instead of a direct consequence. Saxon causes real damage, but never becomes a real opponent. Miami Metro closes the books without a single close call, and Dexter himself loses everyone close to him while still walking away from arrest and public exposure. The backlash never really faded. Years later, Showtime brought Michael C. Hall back for a follow-up season set after the events of this finale, largely because so many fans and even people who worked on the original show felt the story never got the ending it deserved. That alone says something. Shows don't usually get a second shot at their own conclusion unless the first one genuinely broke something for people. That's really the split this whole video keeps coming back to. There's the finale as a piece of acting, where Jennifer Carpenter's hospital scene still hits hard. And then there's the finale as an ending to 8 seasons of build-up, which leaves almost every major thread hanging in midair. The knife was never the problem with this finale. The follow-through was. If this changed how you look back at how Dexter ended, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next full breakdown.